it going?
Good.
Good?
Yeah.
Yeah, groove?
Yeah, I mean, it feels fine. I like how my eyeshadow looks.
Oh, pretty.
Hey, thanks. You're throwing me off.
You threw off my groove.
Beware of the groove.
Hey, are you gonna be alright?
The groove. What is up, you guys? Welcome back to the channel and welcome to another gruesome Get Ready With Me video. So that's happening. How are you? If this is your first time seeing my face, my name is Jessica, and every week I sit down here and I talk about a true crime case whilst I put on some makeup. So if that sounds like something that you might enjoy tuning in for weekly, then consider subscribing to the channel and liking this video. Those things are fast, easy, and free, and they help out the channel more than you'd think. At least that's what I'm told. Conversely, if you hate everything about what I just said and you won't be sticking around, no hard feelings. I completely understand that not everyone enjoys every genre of content. So if you'd like to hear the story sans the whole makeup application element, I have made sure to list some other creators down in the description box that have covered today's story in a way that hopefully you'll be more inclined to enjoy. And with all of that said and done, let's go ahead and get into today's case. All right, you guys, so today's case is another request from one of our channel friends. So if you could all join me in extending a big thank you to Emily Jacqueline for requesting this one. Thank you so much, Emily. Your support is so appreciated. Today, we're going to be discussing the disappearance of Shannon Matthews, which is a story that I've definitely heard before, but I must say, no matter how many times I hear the story, I'm dumbfounded each and every time by the sheer stupidity of damn near every single adult involved. I truly believe that my toddler could come up with and execute a significantly more well thought out plan than these people. I mean, to their credit, I'm also convinced my toddler might be an evil genius, so there's that. But anyways, what do you say I stop yapping and actually get into telling you what happened? Okay, so Shannon Louise Matthews was born on September 9th, 1998 in Dewsbury in West Yorkshire, which is in England, and her parents were Karen Matthews and Leon Rose. Shannon was Leon and Karen's second child together. They'd had a son about a year before Shannon was born. However, Shannon was actually Karen's third child, third out of a total of 7 children that she'd go on to have over the years with, I believe it was 5 or maybe even 6 different men. And yes, now that you have this information, you've likely already deduced that Shannon didn't have a very traditional family dynamic, and you would be right in that assumption. But I would also like to acknowledge the fact that non-traditional does not necessarily mean bad. I know plenty of incredibly happy and healthy blended families, my own included. I think it is super ignorant to just assume that because a woman has multiple kids with multiple fathers, that means she's a bad person or a bad mom. I think, personally, that if you're loving and supporting your children in the best way that you're capable of doing, and that you're doing your best to foster a healthy relationship between your children and their other parent, if applicable, then no one should feel compelled to judge you. You can go full Nick Cannon, as far as I'm concerned, as long as you are giving those children a healthy environment to grow and thrive in. You do you, boo-boo. Now, with that said, sadly, in Shannon's particular situation, unconventional, non-traditional, unorthodox, however you want to describe her family dynamic, it was synonymous with bad, because her home life was absolutely abhorrent. And I assure you, we are going to get more into that, but before we do, let me give you just a little insight into the matriarch of this family, Miss Karen Matthews. Karen was born in 1975. She was one of 7 children born to her parents June and Gordon Matthews. I believe she had 5 brothers and 1 sister. Now, beyond that, there isn't a ton of information available regarding Karen's early life, but as far as I could tell, her parents seemed like decent people who did their best to bring up their children and to raise them well. However, at some point, Karen was diagnosed by a psychologist as having a borderline learning difficulty, which made her emotionally vulnerable. So what I personally take that to mean is that she was extremely anxious and scared of being rejected or judged or made to feel inadequate in any way. And because of this, her relationships with the people closest to her seemed to suffer a lot. So despite growing up in, again, what I can only extrapolate to be a fairly decent environment, Karen, after a particularly heated argument with her parents, actually left home at age 16, and she stayed estranged from her parents for quite some time following that falling out. And actually, Karen, to this day, is, again, not on speaking terms with her mother, but we'll get more into that later. Now, Karen's learning difficulties made her act kind of childish. She just comes across as really, really immature, and her emotional vulnerability is actually thought to be the reason that she kind of seemed to seek love and acceptance from a lot of different men. Personally, I'm inclined to believe that this started at a pretty young age, but there's really nothing about her love life that's documented prior to the point that she started having children. She gave birth to her first child with her first baby daddy in 1996 when she was about 20. Then in 97, she and Leon had their son, followed by Shannon in 98. Then in 2000, she had her fourth child with her third baby daddy. She's about 25 at this point. Then in 2002, she has her fifth child with her fourth man, before going on to have another child in 2003 with a fifth man, and then she had her final child in 2005. And the reason that I said at the beginning that she had 7 kids with either 5 or 6 different men is because every report you read is steadfast in saying that it's 5 different men, but the details of her final child's paternity are super confusing. But regardless, the fact remains that Karen had 7 children over the span of 10 years, and I don't know about y'all, but as someone who has been pregnant and someone who genuinely enjoys being pregnant, that sounds like a lot. And a lot of people believe that the main reason that Karen kept just churning out these kids was so that she could collect as much government assistance as possible, because Karen did not work. And obviously, the more children you have, the more help you're eligible to receive from the government, or I guess they call it counsel over there. The only reason I'm questioning it is because I know that the housing assistance is called council housing, but I don't know if the other financial benefits are called government benefits, council benefits. I don't know. Somebody who does know, just feel free to set me straight down below. Now, I obviously have no idea what the precise logistical breakdown was for Karen's benefits, but I do know that at the time our story takes place, 4 of her 7 children were living in her home with her, and for that she was collecting roughly £400 a week in benefits. Which, if you take the UK's inflation rate over the last 15 years into account, nowadays that would be about £575 a week, which converted to dollars for us over here in America would be close to $700 a week. And on top of that money, she was also provided council housing in the Dewsbury Moor estate, which is located east of Huddersfield in an incredibly impoverished area of West Yorkshire. I think I've actually heard that area in particular be described as one of the poorest areas in the UK as a whole. So yeah, it was a very low income area with high unemployment rates, high crime rates, just a lot of people struggling every day just to get by. Karen and her kids moved into the Dewsbury Moor estate in the early 2000s, and within a few months, Karen, who was 28 at this point, took up a romantic relationship with her next door neighbor's 18-year-old brother, Craig Meehan. They met because Craig used to frequently hang out around the Dewsbury Moor since his sister lived there, but within just 3 weeks of dating Karen, he began living there, but not with his sister. No. Instead, this 18-year-old kid was like, you know what? I bet it would be really fun to move in with my new girlfriend, who's an entire decade older than me, and her gaggle of children. Now, from my understanding, Karen was already pregnant with her 7th child when she and Craig started dating. But if I'm being honest, the more you look into it, the more confusing it kind of starts to get, and the timeline's real murky. I'm not 1,000% sure what happened with this 7th kid, but I think the main takeaway is that it was not Craig's, even though I think people did think it was for a while, but It's not, and really it's neither here nor there. So to recap, in this house, we've got Karen, Shannon, 3 of Shannon's half-siblings, and their new man-child stepfather, Craig. So 6 people all crammed into this house under conditions that were so poor that Karen's children actually ended up on the council's at-risk register, meaning that Karen and her children were meant to be consistently monitored to ensure the children's safety. I'll let you decide throughout the course of the story how well you think that went. And if you've never heard this story, there's a chance that you're thinking like, okay, well, how bad was it really? To which I would say, girl, it was bad. The house was absolutely filthy. The kids were neglected. Karen didn't feed them regularly. She didn't maintain their hygiene. She spent her benefit money on alcohol and cigarettes and like bullshit junk food for her and Craig, but she was not willing to provide even the most basic essentials for her children. As in, supposedly, Karen didn't ever even buy diapers for her babies. Yeah, instead she would use whatever she could trudge up for free. I mean, we simply can't expect her to cut into her alcohol fund, can we? Seriously though, this broad would apparently use just miscellaneous pieces of fabric, curtains, and even plastic bags and tape as diapers on these children. Oh yeah, I told you, some of the facts of this story are outrageous. Like, what in the UTI could this woman have possibly been thinking? And it just gets worse from there. She didn't take him to the doctor. She barely made sure they got to school. At one point, Shannon was found to be completely infested with head lice. It is just awful to think that these poor children, or any children really, would be forced to live in an environment like this because their parents are too lazy and self-centered to take proper care of them. It makes my stomach turn. It makes my blood boil. I just don't understand how anyone could treat any child, let alone their own children, like this. Anyways, I don't think it's going to come as any huge shock to you when I say that Shannon was absolutely fucking miserable living with Karen. She hated being forced to live basically starving and in total squalor, and she and Karen would actually argue about this pretty frequently. They did not have a very loving, healthy mother-daughter relationship. Poor Shannon even at one point wrote on the wall of her bedroom, like underneath where some wallpaper had pulled up, she wrote, "I want to live with my dad," which is so freaking sad. Especially when you consider the fact that Shannon's brother, which was Karen and Leon's son, he had always lived with Leon from the time that Leon and Karen separated. But Karen had made a point to ask to keep Shannon with her, even though from as early as at least Shannon's birth and maybe even the birth of Karen's first child, it was pretty obvious that she was a shit mom. Shannon actually lived with Karen's parents, June and Gordon, for the first few months of her life. Because even in the hospital, Karen was already showing signs of being a neglectful mother. So June and Gordon took Shannon for the first few months until they believed that Karen had gotten her shit together enough to take her back and to take over caring for her. Unfortunately, what they were unaware of was that Karen had absolutely no intention of caring for Shannon or any of her other children, for that matter. Leon did maintain communication with Shannon for a while, and they had a good relationship, but sadly, Karen cut off Leon and Shannon's communication over a child support disagreement, which I'm sure further catapulted Shannon into despair. And then what's even sadder is that on top of all of the shit she's got going on at home, Shannon really didn't even get a reprieve when she went to school. Now, she did have friends, but because Karen was a horrendous mother who never took the time to manage her children's hygiene, Shannon would often get bullied for either wearing dirty clothes or even for sometimes smelling kind of off. It just seemed like no matter where she went or what she did, she could not catch a break. Which brings us to the evening of Monday, February 18th, 2008. That night, Shannon and Karen ended up in a particularly heated argument that actually stemmed as a result of an argument that Craig and Shannon had been having, where Shannon ended up cursing at Craig, which, I mean, he probably deserved it, but I'll get more into that later. But at the time, this caused Karen, who clearly cares more about her flavor of the month than she does about her own children to fly off the handle at Shannon and subsequently ground her. This really upset Shannon, and she actually ended up leaving the house and running down the road to her uncle Martin's house. And like I said, she was visibly upset. So right away, Martin's like, "What is going on? What is wrong?" And it breaks my heart, but Shannon cried to Martin and told him that she was scared to go home because she was in trouble, and she begged him to let her stay the night at his house. And that is something I physically cannot wrap my mind around. Like, it does not compute with me. I do not care how mad I get at my kids, ever. I will still make sure that no matter what is happening, scared of me is something that they never are. And what's even worse, if you can believe it, is according to Martin, this kind of episode was pretty frequent from Shannon. Allegedly, she would come around a lot, crying and saying that she didn't want to go home and saying that she hated living with her mom. Mind you, this is Karen's brother that she's saying all of this to, and she also allegedly had shown him bruises on her arms before that she said she had received from Craig lashing out. Sadly, though, despite feeling incredibly empathetic for Shannon, Martin told her that she probably should not stay the night at his house if she was grounded, and against his better judgment, he asked his 10-year-old daughter, which was Shannon's cousin Tyler, to walk Shannon home. Sidebar, wow, Tyler is seriously such a cute name for a little girl. Oh my god. And when little Tyler got back home, she told Martin, her dad, that Shannon had cried the entire way back to her house, which is understandable. I think anyone would cry knowing that they had to go back to that hellhole. But Shannon did. She went back to the house, she went straight to her room, and she went straight to bed. She woke up the next morning, which was Tuesday, February 19th, and for once, she was actually looking forward to going to school. Because not only was this going to get her out of the house and away from Karen and Craig, but that day her class was actually going to have their first swimming lesson, which she had been looking forward to for weeks. She hopped down off her bunk bed, she got dressed into her school uniform, pulled on her rain boots, and she grabbed her bags. She was ready to leave the house right at 8 a.m., but not before Karen managed to spew just a little bit more spiteful, disgusting venom at her 9-year-old daughter, instead of just letting go of whatever had happened the night before, because remember, they've already discussed it. Shannon's already been grounded. But instead of just moving on and telling her daughter, "I love you, have a nice day, good luck at your first swim lesson," Karen decided to resurrect the previous night's argument, ultimately shouting at Shannon and telling her to get out of the house and not to come back. And as poor Shannon made the half-mile walk to school that morning, she told her cousins all about the fight from the night before, as well as what her mom had said to her as she was leaving the house that morning. It chaps my ass every time I have to refer to Karen as Shannon's mother, because in my opinion, she does not have a maternal bone in her entire stupid body. If I haven't made it painfully clear, I really don't like this woman. Is it just me? Can you imagine speaking to your young child like that? I would not even talk like that to my grown-ass man of a husband. So I don't care how mad you are. You don't talk like that to anyone, but especially not to someone you love. Because you know what they say, be careful what you wish for. It just might happen. And that is exactly the case here, because that afternoon, Shannon did not return to her house after school. And for the next 23 days, 18 hours, and 22 minutes, friends and family were left to wonder if they'd ever see her again. Her neighbors were left to fear for the safety of their own children, and Karen Matthews barely seemed to care at all. So Shannon was last confirmed to have been seen outside of her school around like 3:10 p.m. following her class's swimming lesson at the Dewsbury Sports Center. Shannon was seen via CCTV footage entering and exiting the sports center, so she had made it to and from her lesson safely, but beyond that, it was like she had disappeared into thin air. Typically, she would return home from school around 3:30 in the afternoon. However, that Tuesday in particular, she didn't. In fact, Shannon would never return to the Dewsbury Moor house ever again. So, question for my fellow parents out there. Let's say you're in this situation. Hypothetically speaking, of course, because God willing, none of us will ever be in this situation, but for the next few seconds, let's pretend we are. Your kid doesn't show up back at home after school at the time they normally do. How long are you waiting before you go out to look for them? And then beyond that, say that you don't find them when you go out looking. How long are you then waiting before you call the police? Because here's my answer. I'm out looking once they're 5 minutes late, and I'm calling the police if I don't see them walking down my street within another 5 minutes. I don't care if that's over the top. I don't care if that makes me sound like a helicopter parent. I don't care how crazy I sound. I don't care if I become the town loon from that point on. I am not fucking around when it comes to my kids' safety. And as true crime aficionados, like we are, I think it's safe to say that we are all well aware of the fact that the first 48 hours after a child goes missing are the most critical in terms of finding them and returning them home safely. So with that in mind, you want to know how long it took Karen to get off her ass and do anything about the fact that Shannon was potentially missing? Actually, you know what? Why don't you chew on that for a second? I'm going to take my break, throw on my lashes, and when we come back, the jackassery really begins. Don't go nowhere. Okay, so we're back. Are you ready for the answer? Are you ready to find out how long Karen waited to pretend she cared that Shannon was missing? Too long. That's how long. She waited until 4 o'clock before she even went around the neighborhood to ask if anyone had seen Shannon. She waited until 4:10 to call the school to see if Shannon had made it back from the swimming lesson. And here's the real kicker. Are you ready for this? She waited over 3 hours to call the police and finally report her 9-year-old daughter missing. Yeah, Karen's 999 call was not placed until 6:48 p.m., which is 3 hours and 18 minutes after her daughter should have been home from school. That is when this woman finally decided, you know, maybe this is serious.
Police emergency. Hiya, I want the cotton daughter is missing, please. Right, how old is she? 9. 9? Yeah. When did you last see her? She went to school this morning. Right, have there been any arguments or anything? No, not at all. No. Have you been in touch with any of her friends or anybody like that? Everywhere I can think of her, friends-wise and family and everything. And nobody at all? No. Any information or where she can be? No. Does she go to school and come back on her own normally then? Yes. Right, so you were expecting her home off at 4 o'clock? About 3:30 later, she's come back from school, she finished school at 3. Does she have a mobile phone or anything like that? No, just at home. Just, right, so there's no way of actually ringing to find out. But you've rung round all her friends, and you've been in touch with all her relatives, and there's nowhere else that you've got left to look? No. Have you been in touch with the school, or can they confirm whether she went to school at normal time at 3:10? Right. What do they call her? Shannon Matthews. Has she been missing before? No, it's first time. And there's been nothing to intimate why she should go? No.
Now, thankfully, police took Shannon's disappearance seriously from the very beginning. Within minutes of Karen's call, they were at her door, and by the next morning, the West Yorkshire police had started a massive search of over 200 officers out looking for Shannon. It was briefly discussed that Shannon could have potentially run away, but that theory was dismissed by about 7 a.m. the next morning. And police were actually so concerned with Shannon's disappearance that they brought in homicide and major inquiry. And then, in addition to police efforts, the Dewsbury Moor community also rallied behind Karen by initiating their own efforts to hopefully help bring Shannon home safely. Karen's friends and neighbors spent hours printing out pictures of Shannon and hanging them up all over the neighborhood and the surrounding areas to help spread the word of her disappearance. By day 2 of the police search, close to 200 additional just civilian volunteers joined the 200 officers that were already out looking for Shannon. Like I said, Karen's immediate community really rallied behind their family. And a lot of these community efforts to find Shannon McCann were actually organized by Karen's friend and neighbor, Julie Bushby, who also just so happened to be the chair of the Moorside Residents and Tenants Association. And Julie took it upon herself to orchestrate marches and personal searches, door-to-door inquiries. She created and passed out posters and leaflets. I mean, you name it, she did it. She really seemed determined to do everything in her power to bring this little girl home. Unlike Karen, who went directly against police's warnings not to talk to the media and to leave all public communications regarding Shannon's disappearance to them. And they were not cryptic about their messaging or the reason behind it. They specifically told her that they did not want her talking to the press because publicly doing anything without police guidance could potentially put Shannon's life at risk. But what Karen heard from all this was, please go home and immediately make a public statement about Shannon's disappearance on national television. Yeah, potato, potato, I guess. Speaking of media coverage of this case, there was a lot of scrutiny on the media regarding the undeniable imbalance of coverage of Shannon's case in comparison to the coverage provided over Madeleine McCann's case. Now, ironically, Madeleine McCann's case has actually found its way back into the limelight over the past week and a half with that Polish woman who thinks that she's her. But even without that, I assume that most of you are more than familiar with Madeleine McCann, but if by some chance you're not, Madeleine was a almost 4-year-old little girl from Leicestershire who disappeared without a trace right out of her family's vacation home in Portugal in May of 2007. So it happened just under a year before Shannon went missing. And in stark contrast to the Matthews family, Madeleine's family was incredibly well off because both of her parents, Kate and Jerry McCann, were doctors. So when it came to Madeleine's disappearance, it seemed like everyone took notice. Premier League footballers were wearing yellow ribbons in her honor. There was a massive reward offered for information leading to her safe return. And Madeleine's family even had celebrities such as Philip Green, Simon Cowell, and Sir Richard Branson speak out publicly regarding her disappearance and offer to help the McCann family in any way that they could. But when it came to spreading the word to the public regarding Shannon's disappearance, her family and friends were callously shooed away from a rugby game because they tried to pass out flyers to help raise awareness. A reward of just £50,000 was offered for help in finding Shannon, which paled in comparison to the £2.5 million offered for information leading to Madeleine's return. And as far as I'm aware, there was little to no celebrity intervention when it came to bringing attention to Shannon's disappearance. So yeah, it's pretty obvious that because Shannon's family was unconventional and low income and less glamorous than the McCanns, her disappearance was not viewed by media outlets as, as much of a ratings generator, which is absolute bullshit. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that Madeleine did not deserve the level of coverage and support that she got. I'm just saying that Shannon deserved the same. Everyone deserves the same. And it just sucks that the media gets to cherry pick who they focus on and who they spread information on and who they try to help bring home. But despite the shortfalls of the media, the police really did put a massive amount of effort into their search for Shannon. I already mentioned that they had tons of officers out scouring Dewsbury looking for Shannon, but they also called in the help of behavioral experts, scientists, mountain rescue teams, and specially trained search dogs. They searched upwards of 3,000 houses. They stopped something like 15 different motorists. They questioned and searched the home of every registered sex offender within a 20-mile radius of Shannon's home. I mean, it really and truly seems like they did give their all to the investigation. Actually, the search for Shannon was the largest search effort in the area, and I think close to 30 years. And when all was said and done, they had spent upwards of £3 million in resources just trying to find this little girl. But the longer and longer they searched, all while making seemingly no progress, the more and more they began to fear that perhaps Shannon was not going to be coming home alive after all. And at the 1 week mark, it seemed like Shannon's friends and neighbors were all starting to lose hope. Local churches held services where they led prayers for Shannon. Her neighbors at Dewsbury Moor held a vigil in her honor exactly a week after she'd gone missing. And Shannon's best friend, Megan Aldridge, even gave a heartbreaking public statement talking about how sad she was that her best friend was missing. So I've talked at length about what everyone else was doing in the wake of Shannon's disappearance, but what was Karen doing? You may be wondering. Acting like a fucking weirdo. That's what. Again, despite being told not to engage with the media, Karen took it upon herself to try her very hardest to turn her daughter's disappearance into her own personal 15 minutes of fame. She took every opportunity she possibly could to personally capitalize on the media attention that Shannon was getting, and she was very clearly relishing the fact that she was being featured on TV. For example, at one point, a news station was filming out in front of Karen's house, and Karen stood inside flicking her curtains back and forth so that she could watch them move on TV in real time. You could just tell that she thought that being on TV was just like the coolest thing. Never mind how or why she was on TV and what had initially gotten people to focus on her in the first place. You know, who cares if your daughter's missing when you can watch yourself open and close curtains on live TV? I mean, this woman she's got to be borderline sociopathic. And on top of her obsession with seeing herself on TV, police also pretty quickly started to notice that Karen didn't really seem to be acting in a way that you would expect a grieving mother to be acting. And while yes, there's no right or wrong way to act in the wake of a tragedy, and someone's affect following trauma tells us virtually nothing about them, Karen's behavior was just fucking bizarre. She was constantly laughing and making jokes. She rarely seemed to show any emotion regarding her missing daughter, unless of course there were cameras around. But behind closed doors, Karen was kind of just living it up. She was hanging out with Craig, she was playing video games, she was drinking. At one point, a local grocery store actually offered Karen a completely complimentary grocery trip, which she eagerly took them up on. But the part that raised some eyebrows was that she and Craig went, grabbed 2 carts, filled one up with food, and then filled the other up with a shitload of booze. Seriously, what is wrong with this woman? Your daughter, your 9-year-old daughter, is missing. Why are you stocking up on alcohol like you run a frat house? And speaking of living every day like it's just one giant party, at one point while sitting down and talking to the police, one of the officers' cell phones rang and Karen got up and started dancing to the ringtone. Oh yeah, we can talk about my missing daughter in just a minute, but first I've got to bust a move to this sick-ass beat. And police were not the only ones who were noticing how completely Looney Tunes Karen was acting. Karen's friend Natalie Brown also started to wonder pretty early on if Karen knew more about where Shannon was than she was letting on. She just could not fathom any other explanation for Karen going against police and talking to the media and acting just downright indifferent to the fact that her daughter was missing. But understandably, she was apprehensive to just flat out accuse Karen of having something to do with Shannon's disappearance because, I mean, God forbid she was wrong. Can you imagine? That said, just because Natalie wouldn't outright accuse Karen of orchestrating her own daughter's kidnapping, she did still share her frustrations with Karen about the fact that she had gone against the police and gone in front of the media, despite them saying that that would be dangerous for Shannon. And in response to being called out by Natalie, Karen doubled down and held a press conference. And during this press conference, Karen can be seen holding this little teddy bear that has this little pink shirt on that says "with love" on it. And a lot of people have compared this to how Kate McCann, when speaking, would often be holding like a small stuffed cat that had belonged to Madeline. I think it was called Cuddle Cat or something like that. It really started to seem like Karen was in this demented, one-sided competition with Kate McCann. And I say this because that freaking teddy bear she was toting around wasn't even Shannon's teddy bear. It was just some random ass bear she'd plucked out of some pile of clutter in her house and tried to pass off as Shannon's. But people actually really bought into Karen's story following her press conference, and this actually all led to a public broadcast TV station offering to air almost like a reality show type thing that centered around Karen and the rest of Shannon's family and their life following Shannon's disappearance, which it was bizarre. It was just a lot of Craig playing video games, Karen eating and smoking cigarettes. I don't know. I didn't really watch much of it, but the videos I could find, if I'm being honest, were strange.
No. No. No.
Anyways, by this point, it's about 3 weeks into Shannon's disappearance, and police really don't seem to be getting any closer to finding her than they were at the beginning of the search. And everyone was really starting to lose hope. That is, until they received a tip from a, quote, distant extended family member of Craig's, who told them that it might do them well to look into a man named Michael Donovan. Apparently, this Michael Donovan character was Craig's uncle, by the way, and apparently Uncle Mike had been laying real low since about the same time that Shannon had disappeared. So, a little bit about Mike. He ain't great. Michael Donovan, who was actually born Paul Drake, was the youngest of 9 children, and he'd lived in Dewsbury all his life. His rap sheet started when he was around 11, when he was busted for arson and shoplifting, and it just continued to expand and escalate from there. He ran away when he was 16, he changed his name, and eventually he got married and had 2 daughters. However, it was not all sunshine and rainbows, and due to his claims that his wife was violent and had a drug problem, they divorced and Michael was granted custody of his 2 children. Custody that he eventually lost after allegations were made that he had made his daughters watch him have relations with sex workers. Like, you couldn't even make this stuff up. And then, following this loss of custody and about 15 months before Shannon disappeared, Michael was actually accused of, drumroll please, kidnapping. Yep, he was accused of kidnapping after he had picked his daughters up from school one day, even though doing so was in direct violation of the court order against him. He didn't care, picked him up anyway, drove him to a bed and breakfast where he checked in under a fake name, and he stayed there with them for 3 days until he was found by police and arrested. And not only is Michael's past sordid at best, it was also extremely suspicious that Karen had seemed to have deliberately left him off the list of extended family and friends that she'd provided to police following Shannon's disappearance. You know, it kind of seemed like maybe for some reason she didn't want them to know about him. I can't imagine why. And when questioned about this oversight, Karen was like, that's weird. I don't think I know a Michael Donovan. And police were like, well, that's funny because we've got people telling us that you guys are like super duper close, like sitting on his lap at a family barbecue recently that happened right before your daughter disappeared type close. And Karen's like, oh, Michael Donovan.
I mean, I seen him. I don't know.
Now, obviously, at this point, given all of this new information, the next step for police is to head on over to Mikey's flat so they can have a wee little chat with him. I'm really sorry. I don't know why I did that. So they head to Michael's flat on Friday, March 14th, 2008. Knock on the door just before 1 p.m. They knocked and knocked and they knocked and they knocked and they knocked and they knocked, and shockingly, no one answered. So they knocked some more, and in fact, they knocked so much that Michael's downstairs neighbor actually came out of their flat and was like, "Hey, what's the deal?" To which police responded that they were trying to contact Michael Donovan. And the neighbor's like, "Oh, well, that's weird that he's not answering because I know for a fact that he's home, and I actually just heard some little footsteps running around a minute ago, in between all the incessant knocking." And now, knowing not only that Michael is in the apartment, but that there may be someone in there making tiny footsteps, like perhaps a little girl, perhaps like the missing little girl that they've been looking for almost 24 days, they called in backup. They called in the Operations Support Unit, and as soon as the extra officers arrived, they forced their way into Michael's apartment, where, much to their surprise, they saw absolutely no one. So, room by room, they began clearing the apartment, and despite what Michael's neighbor had said, it appeared that no one was in there. And they were feeling pretty discouraged, pretty deflated at that point. That is, until all of a sudden, from underneath the bed, one of the officers heard a teeny tiny little voice say, "Stop it, you're frightening me." And then, like the tiny little miracle she was, Shannon emerged crying from underneath the bed. Police could not believe what they were seeing. They had been searching for this girl for almost a month, and she had been right under their noses this entire time. As police began escorting her out of the apartment, Shannon actually told them that Michael was hiding out under the same bed that she'd just come out from under, so they demanded that he come out, that he, quit being a weenie, come out and face the consequences of what he'd done like a man. But obviously that didn't happen, and Michael Donovan had to be forcibly removed from under that bed. And during the struggle, he actually bit one of the police officers because he's ridiculous. But you know what he's not? Quiet. Because in the police van on his way to be booked into the Halifax police station, Michael was already singing like a fucking canary. He wasn't even in custody for 15 minutes before he started telling them that they needed to get Karen right down to the station too. He told them that they needed to get Karen down there talking because he was not the only one responsible for what had happened to Shannon, that the two of them had actually had a plan. To clarify, I am in no way saying that Michael shouldn't have squealed on Karen. He absolutely should have, because respectfully, fuck that bitch. I'm just saying that if he was gonna break down and tattle so easily, he probably should have done it before he was in this deep, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So they do just that. They bring Karen down to the station, where, by the way, she showed little to no emotion over the fact that her missing daughter had been found. And when they started to question her about the accusations that Michael had been hurling at her, she, not surprisingly, denied everything. And frustratingly, even though police do not believe that she's completely innocent, they really didn't have anything to support their suspicions other than what Michael was saying. So initially, Karen was released and allowed to go back home. However, Shannon was not allowed to go home with her, which people definitely thought was odd. It was also odd that while the Dewsbury Moor community was celebrating the fact that Shannon had been found alive and was now safe, Karen seemed more concerned and more unhappy now than she had over the entire 24-day span that Shannon had been missing. Natalie and Julie especially were side-eyeing Karen. They just could not understand what the heck was going on with this woman. A woman that, until recently, they had viewed as a very close friend. But now it was like they didn't even know her. Looking at her now was like looking at a complete stranger. Plot twist though, despite the mounting suspicion against Karen, the next person from Shannon's family that was arrested was actually Craig, not Karen. Now, he wasn't arrested for anything having to do with Shannon's disappearance. No. Rather, he was arrested because following Shannon's disappearance, police had seized some of Karen and Craig's personal belongings as potential evidence, and somewhere deep within the depths of crusty little Craig's computer hard drive, police had actually discovered 49 we'll say, indecent images of children, some as young as 4 years old. So Karen's life is basically crumbling around her. Things clearly are not going her way anymore. She's no longer being viewed as this grieving, sympathetic mother. Her creepy little boyfriend's been ripped away from her. She's just having a real rough couple of days. And eventually, the pressure of it all finally became just too much for her to bear, and ultimately, she cracked. Well, kind of. She admitted to police that she had known where Shannon was the whole time that she was missing, but that she'd only sent Shannon to stay with Michael while she made preparations to leave Craig.
Thank God. I was so worried for a second that the reasoning wouldn't make sense.
Rightfully so. Police are not buying this for even a second. Because it's not like Shannon was just hanging out at Michael's, kicking it, living her best. No. For 24 days, this poor little girl had been held captive in Michael's disgusting apartment and forced to follow a list of ridiculous rules, all that had been set for the sole purpose of concealing the fact that she was alive and being held there against her will. If people ever came over to Michael's flat, Shannon was forced to hide under the bed, just like she'd been doing when she was ultimately rescued. And if Michael ever had to leave the apartment, Shannon was restrained with essentially a leash that Michael had connected to the ceiling that would allow Shannon to move about just enough to get from the bedroom to the bathroom. And during the course of the investigation, it was also discovered that Shannon had been drugged in order to subdue her and to keep her compliant. And this was not just during the 24 days that she was missing. The follicle test that they did on Shannon actually revealed that she had been drugged with multiple different sedatives for almost 2 years prior to her disappearance. So yeah, they were much more inclined to believe Michael's version of events, which was that Karen had approached him with a plan to make it look like Shannon had been kidnapped so that eventually, once the reward money was high enough, Michael could then stage this miraculous discovery of Shannon, collect the reward money, and then he and Karen would split it. And Michael claimed that he didn't want any part of this plan at first, but that Karen had threatened to have him jumped or even killed if he didn't go along with it and help her, so supposedly that's why he agreed. So on December 4th, 2008, Karen and Michael were both found guilty of kidnapping, false imprisonment, and perverting the course of justice, and they were both sentenced to 8 years behind bars. Yeah, 8 years. Just 8. Oh, and Craig was sentenced to 20 weeks for what they'd found on his computer. Yeah, I thought America's legal system was trash, but Britain seemed to be real lax, so maybe everywhere sucks. I don't know. If you've been doing the math in your head, yes, all of these mouth breathers are out of prison today. Karen actually ended up only serving 4 years of her 8-year sentence. She was released in 2012 and given a new home and new identity in the south of England. She does not have any contact with any of her 7 children, and I believe that most of her other family and friends have also kind of disowned her as well. Her mother doesn't talk to her anymore, Natalie doesn't talk to her anymore, Julie visited her in prison for a while, but I'm pretty sure that presently they don't talk anymore, her siblings don't talk to her. More or less, it just seems like she's lost contact with everyone from that period of her life, but I honestly doubt she cares. And I guess good for her. She got what she always wanted. She is definitely famous. She's known all throughout the UK as Britain's worst mom, so congratulations, Karen. You made it. Michael was also released in 2012. There's not really a lot out there about what he's currently up to, but I doubt that it's anything spectacular, so who cares? As for creepy little Craig, he served his sentence, and he has spent the time since his release living a kind of forced transient lifestyle, because every time people realize who he is and that he's living near them, they start a fucking riot and basically force him out. He's even been physically attacked out in public before after someone realized who he was, which totally isn't funny. Allegedly, he's basically gone into hiding because he cannot show his face in public without receiving just an avalanche of hate. And finally, following her abduction, Shannon was cared for by social services before she was given a new identity and placed with a new family. She's 24, almost 25 years old today, and I just hope that wherever she is, she's gotten the help that she needed and that she is happy and healthy and loved. And with that, you guys, we are about wrapped for today. Thank you again so much to Emily Jacqueline for requesting that I cover this case. And as always, a big thank you to everyone else for taking the time to watch this video and to listen to this story. Let me know your thoughts on this case in the comments down below. Specifically, I would love to know if you think the sentences given and the actual time served by each of these doorknobs was adequate. If you have a case or a topic that you're just dying for me to cover, please fill out the request submission form that I have linked in the description box. As of right now, I am trying to do a requested case at least every other week, so I promise you, if you request a case, eventually I will cover it. If you haven't already and you'd like to, go ahead and subscribe to my channel and turn on the post notifications. I put out new videos every week, and I'd love to catch you back here in my next one. But until then, stay safe and have a good week. Bye, guys. What? Aaron was diagnosed. The only reason I'm questioning it. Did I say that? Are those words? What?
Kisses. I love you.
Love you too. Her frame. I am so pretty. Listen, I'm just trying to find an eyelash curler.